5:23 is hereby in order. I'd like to say welcome to everyone out in our television audience and our members and guests here in the studio today. We have two guests I'd like to welcome in particular, Veronica Sanford and Tiffany Everett. Last week at my house, we actually entertained 4 graduation couples because last week in Maysville for the Mason County High School it was graduation time and they went to the prom, so it was kind of wild around there, and we actually fed them dinner. And I had never heard of this before. Being in Chicago, we went out to eat before prom and went out to the prom, and we didn't see any parents. That's the last thing we wanted to see actually at prom. But these 4 couples came over and we served them dinner. We went out to the prom, and actually they do a walkthrough, and I don't know if this is normal for everybody, but they go through this like stage, and they call it a red carpet. So they walk through and you take pictures with them and that sort of thing. It's actually interesting, but it was the parents that do this. So I thought that was neat. Last Sunday, of course, was Mother's Day. So I assume everybody celebrated Mother's Day. But where I'm really leading here is the postal rates went up. And my wife works in the post office. So every time these postal rates go up, I have to suffer through them with her. I mean, it's really something else to be married to somebody that actually sells stamps, and the stamps go up a penny, and it changes everything. It's not just that stamp you buy, it's a whole price list that changes. And I had to live that for the last week or two, and it drives her crazy. I really don't know because I'm like numb to it. I think it's 40 or 41 cents, and nowadays you can buy these forever stamps. They're supposed to last forever. Whatever.
15 of them.
Yeah.
15 pages of them.
Yeah, well, that's it. I'll tell you a story sometime about how I met my wife. It's through the post office. Gary and Rita Reese are not here today. Gary is the keynote speaker at an event in Florida. A couple things I wanted to note before we totally get started here is, one, this club meets typically the 3rd Saturday of every month at 9 o'clock. And that's really for our television audience. It's the 3rd Saturday every month at 9 o'clock. If you need if you need the address, I guess, or the telephone number, I guess we could present that at some point. I don't have it here in front of me, so we could do that. The order of business today, by the way, I'm the VP of Education. I'll be filling in for Gary Reese, which is the president, so I'll try to fill in his duties today. This time I'd like to introduce our Toastmaster. She's been around these circles, I think, for a couple of years and knows a lot of stuff, and she's got her, I don't know what you call the bling. But I'd like to introduce Carol Kormelink.
Thank you, Mr. Temporary President, soon to be President. And I'd like to welcome everyone here today again. I'd like to welcome the audience in the studio and at home. I'm Carol Kormelink, the Toastmaster for the meeting. It is the Toastmaster's task to explain the components of the meeting, to introduce each speaker, the general evaluator and her evaluation team, and to form a bridge between the various parts of the meeting. Our general evaluator this morning will be our guest Toastmaster from the Fifth Third Madisonville Club, which you'll get to meet later, and she will evaluate the evaluators. She will ask for reports from the rest of her team, and then she will evaluate the meeting in general. The timer, Steve Aaronholtz, down here in front, he records the length of each person's speech and provides a visual sign to the speaker. Green when you've reached the minimum time, yellow when you're halfway in between, and red is the stop. And if Tiffany had her way, she'd have a big gong and would gong people off when they reached their maximum time. Those boring business meetings at work wouldn't be so boring if people learned how to be concise and be on time. So our impromptu session starts with the grammarian all-counter who presents a new or a little-known word for us to learn. He then records the number of times that each person uses the word during the meeting, and this serves to increase everyone's vocabulary. And as the all-counter, he will count all those filler words, those words that we don't need to say, like ah, so, you know. We need to have stately pauses instead of those nondescriptive filler words. And a lady in our meeting the other night, it was so cute. She said, "When did I learn this? Because as a baby, I didn't go, I thought that was such a good illustration. So let us welcome our grammarian all-counter, Gordon Kelly, with the word of the day. Gordon Kelly.
Yep. As grammarian, my duties will be to listen and note the following. I'll note excellent use of language, mistakes in grammar, poor sentence construction, cliches and overused words and phrases, and use of the word of the day. And the word of the day, I'm going along with Darren's theme here today. This is really not a hard word. I think we all know it, although I haven't visited one probably since I had my heart attack in 2005, because I just don't have the energy. But the word of the day is gym. G-Y-M. Gymnasium or gym. This is an athletic facility equipped for sports or physical training. Gym. It actually comes from a Greek word. I think the Greek word, I can't remember what the Greek word was, but it might be gymnasium. Thanks,
Thank
Bill.
you very much, Gordon. That's a very appropriate word for this meeting, and I go to the gym with my personal trainer every Thursday. So I do know, I have little experience with the gym. Our next order of business is the Tabletopics Master that helps members to increase their extemporaneous speaking skills, thinking quickly, listening, and they speak for 2 minutes on a surprise topic. Table topics are actually mini speeches. They have an opening, a body, and a conclusion, and that tests how well we think and listen and think quickly off the cuff. Extemporaneous speaking skills are extremely valuable in the business world, and we challenge you to use the word of the day, Jim, as you answer the question truthfully. You can let your imagination run wild, or that reminds me to talk about something else. I don't know how they're going to get that in with your theme, but try to think and speak for a minimum of 1 minute until the green is shown, 1.5 minutes the yellow, and at the end, 2 minutes is red. And when you see all 3 cards held up, you know that you've exceeded your allowance. Our guest topics master, Veronica Sanford, is the current Vice President of Membership at the Fifth Third Madisonville Campus Club, FTMT. She loves and owns over 1,000 DVDs and videos. She hopes to get them all copied to disc and backed up in her safety deposit box. This probably gives you a clue that our Table Topics theme today is movies. Let us get a hearty welcome to Topic Master Veronica Sanford.
Thank you, Carol. Are there any gyms in the audience today? I know it doesn't count. So today, as Carol had said, I'm looking to find out how many of you love and own movies. The question today for the first one is, what is your all-time favorite movie, its genre, and why you loved it? Joe Schwerling. Joe Schwerling.
Madam Topic Master. My favorite movie depends on the genre. But within each genre, I would have a different favorite movie that is dependent on which one I'm watching right now. Myself, I probably have copies of thousands of movies myself. Many of them on videotapes have never been labeled. So for me, it's like a treasure hunt if I ever try to find one in particular. But I just go to the library to check out anything that's current, or I just browse the shelves and look at what's interesting. But I have a favorite movie in every possible category, except I can tell you the ones that I don't like, the horror uh, extreme violence movies like these Halloween and Friday the 13th and you know, the people in masks and chainsaws and all that. I never watch them. I don't watch too many of the straight adventure movies anymore. I like comedies, musicals, musical romances, romance adventure, things that have, certainly almost everything has to have a happy ending if it's going to be in my top 10 list. So I am a definite aficionado of movies. I have many movies that I could announce as my favorite, but it would just be the one I'm thinking of at the moment because there are always others that when I'm watching on it. But I'll tell you, the best movie is the one that you can watch while you're doing your gymnastics, whether it's in your living room, preferably better than the gym because you can select your own movies. Madam Topic Master.
Good job, Joe. Very good job. All right. Well, my favorite movie of all time is Buckaroo Banzai's Adventures Across the Eighth Dimension. And it's a sci-fi flick, and it's one of the best, I think. Very great fun. And I don't know the actual source of this quote, but it is used in the movie. And it is, wherever you go, there you are. So be nice. What is the first movie that you remember? What made it memorable? And have you seen it again recently? Jane? Jane?
Thank you.
I would say the first movie that I remember was Grace. I would say about maybe 10 years old, and I was just getting into the musical genre of movies. Grease was a very intriguing movie to me because it had different scenes, and at that time I was in a few years I was getting ready to go into high school, and all this dancing and all the activity in the movie was really engaging to me. I've seen Grace, I would say, more than 5 times. And one thing that I would love to see next is a play of Grace. And recently on TV, they were auditioning for the 2 lead roles for Grace Lightning, and I've been following that series, and I would like to see the actual play come out in reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Jane's going to be giving a speech later on today, too, so it was a little unfair for me to have picked on her. One of the tricks with Topic Masters and Table Topics is that if you don't know the answer to the question or you can't think of something, be a politician. Go ahead and change the subject and answer the question you wanted to answer. Now, my favorite genre of all times is comedy. Comedy actually helps you improve your health, as we know from the famous cancer research. When and if you pick a movie to watch, what are you looking for? Drama, fun, mystery, suspense, action? Darren. Darren?
Thank you. Madam Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters. Unlike Joe, I'm not really one for romance movies. I'm not really one for horror movies either, but my favorite genre is probably, I'd say, adventure movies. If I think of one movie that epitomizes a great movie, to me that would probably be Indiana Jones, that entire series. Those movies had a lot of adventure in them, they had a lot of comedy, they were just fantastic movies to watch. And I just thought I just wanted to answer a question you asked earlier, but this kind of epitomizes one of my perfect movies. But when I think about the best movie I've ever seen, there's probably 2 different movies, or 2 movies that came out in series, and that is Godfather Part 1, Godfather Part 2. And I had no interest in the mafia or that type of culture, but when I saw those movies, they just kind of drew you in, and they are very violent, but there's something about those movies that if you sit down and watch them, they just engross you for 2 to 3 hours. And I thought Godfather Part 1 was good, But the great part about that series is you watch Godfather Part 2, it's actually better than Part 1. But overall, I really like the suspense movies, adventure movies. Very few. I have watched some romantic comedies, so I do admit there are some good romantic comedies, even though they have to be pretty good in order to keep my attention. But overall, I prefer the adventure movies, the action movies, and suspense movies. Madam Tabletopics Master, thank you.
Thank you, Darren. One of my favorite movies is The Hitcher. And The Hitcher is kind of a horror movie, kind of a suspense movie, and it deals with somebody who is driving across on a journey, and he is a student going to college, and he picks up a hitchhiker, and things don't turn out so well, and it's suspenseful, very suspenseful. What is the highest number of movies you've watched in a day, and what was that experience like for you? Carol Kormelink. Carol Kormelink.
Thank you, Madam Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and our most welcome guest. What is the most number of movies I watch in a day? If I'm sitting home vegging out, I watch movies all day long if they are the romantic kind. I don't particularly like the song and dance with the Fred Astaire. It's fantastic movement, but I don't watch those too much anymore. I used to like them, but I don't anymore. I like the romance, the ones like Wuthering Heights, where they had this passion for one another, and how I like that type of movie that they have this passion. And I loved in Gone with the Wind. While everyone was attracted to Scarlett, I liked Melanie because she was so gracious, and she always saved Scarlett when she could have been an outcast. Melanie was the one I thought, gee, that would be neat to be like Melanie and be so gracious and so considerate. Never said a bad word about anyone. So those are the type of movies I like. And the one where she's down in Mexico and meets the guy, I can't remember that one, and she's sort of helping raise his daughter. I really like those type of movies. I have this undying love, and they aren't selfish about it. Madam Topics Master.
Thank you, Carol. Now, I cheat. I watch kids' movies, too. And one of my favorite kids' movies is Red Hot Ballroom, because you get both the ballroom dancing, it's a competition. It's a true story, actually, it's a docudrama. And they have kids in New York area in the various school systems being taught ballroom dancing. It builds self-esteem. They're probably about 10 to 13 years old, and then at the end they have a competition, and you're just rooting for these dancers, and you're amazed at how skilled they get. The other movie that I saw the other day was How to Eat Fried Worms, and this is not for the adult audience, but it was a lot of fun. And at the very end of the DVD, they talk about how they made the worms, so they don't really make the kids eat worms, but they ask the kid what their favorite taste was, what their favorite flavor was, and then they made the worms taste like that. The artificial worms, that is. Do you watch the Academy Awards? What is your opinion about ethics shown in movies? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it fair? Is it immoral? Should they have smoking allowed on movies? Now they're showing that, and they didn't used to. Steve Ehrenholz. Steve Ehrenholz.
Thank you, Madam Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters, our honored guests, and our guests watching in from home. Do I think that you want to know what my opinion is on ethics in the movies and the things that they show? Well, I think especially for movies that are going to be observed by people up to about the age of 20 or 25, it does have an influence on what they come to accept as normal behavior. And I think that we hear a lot about the ethics crisis in this country and the fact that there is so much behavior that is really outside of what we used to consider the norms that were acceptable. And we have a lot of our entertainment, we've got people who are behaving extremely badly. And, well, that's our entertainment? I guess that's a question. I'm not sure that showing these different behaviors, especially when in some movies the rating is primarily because the language is so raw, or you have characters that all are extremely rough, and depending on what the outcome of the movie is, they do or don't wind up encountering some kind of penalties for their behavior. I think that it's something that we have to look at and we need to keep in mind, because unfortunately things we see a lot of we tend to become desensitized to as well. And so even though it's something that we might find abhorrent, it's not something that we are necessarily as inclined to do something about. That's why I like underdog movies. I like where the little guy triumphs and overcomes the evil forces. That would be my perspective on what we see in movies as behavioral norms. Madam Tabletopics Master?
Thank you, Steve. I put these people on the spot, and I'm very grateful that they answered fluently. I think that Steve would like the movie How to Eat Fried Worms because there's an underdog in that story for sure. My favorite type of movie, really to make a movie worthwhile to me, is to have one person that has an honorable nature. If there's no one in the movie at all with any honor or character or depth, it doesn't mean much to me. And I like movies where people learn from their mistakes. Madam Toastmaster?
Thank you, Veronica, for that trip down memory lane and hearing about movies I never heard about before. I did like your phrase, be like a politician and change the subject. I thought that was good. We now come to the presentation session where the speakers present prepared speeches from either the basic Competent Communicator Manual or one of the 15 advanced manuals. The manuals provide structure and guidance for improving skills such as organization, vocabulary, vocal variety, and body language. Our first speaker will be Jane Muindi. Jane will be presenting Project 1 from the Basic Competent Communicator Manual. The objectives of Jane's speech are to begin speaking before an audience for 4 to 6 minutes. Jane will share her love of involvement with a non-profit organization focused on providing education to less fortunate children in Kenya. Education for everyone. Education for everyone, Jane Muindi.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. I have a question for you. Have you ever imagined yourself where you'd be, and I would say later on in your life if you had not been able to go to school? I know where I would be. I'd be doing some form of back-breaking work, trying to make ends meet, and also having a few kids who I have no idea of how I'm gonna get their next meal. This is something that's common in Africa. I have been lucky that my family has been able to provide me with an education. I cannot say the same thing to several kids around the world. Just surviving alone is a task by itself, let alone trying to find an education. Today, I will talk to you about an organization called Ugali that I'm involved in, that's taking part in opening doors for education for these less fortunate kids. The Ugali organization was formed in 2001 by a student named Adam. This student was from Xavier University and was taking part in a program called Global Roots. This student went to Kenya in 2000. He was trying to get an experience of different cultures, understanding different cultures where people come from. And in this process, he got this idea of forming this organization. I came to hear about Ugali from a friend called Patrick. He had just arrived in the States in 2001, and he had been helped before to try and pave his path through education so that he can make something out of himself. I've been a member of Ugali since 2002. I've been involved in various activities, such as fundraising to make sure that we have enough funds for paying the school tuition, doing speeches, giving presentations to high school students so that we can also give them a piece of what other cultures have and how fortunate they are in trying to achieve, in getting an education. Last year we had a fundraiser which was a very fun event. This fundraiser featured various African dishes. In the background there was drumming and dancing. And at the same, once the dinner was over, we also had an auction. And this auction, we auctioned various African artifacts that our guests were very enthusiastic about, because these were some artifacts that were handmade, and they were just by bidding on the artifacts itself, the funds were going to a worthy cause. And guess what was the main dish for the dinner? Ugali. The organization is named Ugali. So let me tell you the significance of ugali. This is a staple food in most of African meals. It is made from maize flour and water. This is similar to grits here in the United States, and it's a most inexpensive meal because just maize meal, maize flour, and water. And sometimes in the mix of the meal, you just have a few vegetables and sauces, but for the most part, that's the main dish. It comes in a large mold and is shared by many. You take what you need, and always keeping in mind that there are others who are hungry, so you just take enough for yourself. When people eat ugali, they sit in a circle at the end of the day and share. And that's the same concept you're trying to bring in this organization, that we can, in our efforts in trying to bring out, give education to everybody, we are sharing that as part of the community. And one of the main projects that we are trying to undertake is building a community library which can be accessed by everybody in the community. The same concept as our name, Ugali. We want to share education with everybody. With all this work that we are trying to do, we know the kids now can imagine what their future will be with their education, as having had the education that they need. Madam Toastmaster.
Our second speaker, Darren Henderson, will be speaking from the advanced manual, Speaking to Inform Project 3. The objectives of Darren's speech are to prepare a demonstration speech to clearly explain a process, product, or activity without notes in 5 to 7 minutes. Darren and baby William Joseph Pope were featured in Bethesda Hospital's magazine article, Fast Track to Fatherhood, and is the motivation for Darren's speech. After suffering a relapse in his exercise program, he will demonstrate how to get fit quick. Let us give a hearty welcome to Darren Henderson. Get fit quick. Get fit quick.
Thank you. By a show of hands, how many people exercised this past week? This is a great group. About 50% of the people raised their hands. For the record, I did not, because I did not exercise this past week. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our television audience. 10 years ago, I exercised 2 to 3 times a week for 1 to 2 hours each time. I was in fantastic shape. But over the past 4 to 5 years, as I've had more responsibilities, my life's gotten more hectic, I'm now down to the point where I only exercise 1 or 2 times a month. So this spring, I decided that I was going to get back into better shape. And I'm going to do that through a program that I'm calling Get Fit Quick. And I found this program on the internet, and it's basically a 15 to 20 minute exercise program that's short enough that it allows you to exercise 4 or 5 times a week. Now, I don't think I need to sell any of you on the benefits of exercise. It's been proven time and again that exercise helps to prevent heart disease, high blood pressure, strokes, diabetes, and numerous other illnesses. Also, people who exercise are generally happier. For one thing, if you exercise, you tend to be more happy with your appearance. Also, we know that people who exercise younger in life tend to have more active lifestyles once they age. Also, exercise makes you happier. Endorphins come out when you exercise. So there's no doubt that exercise is the right thing to do. Now, there are three major components to any good exercise program. The first is aerobic exercise. This involves running, jogging, using a stair climbing machine, using a treadmill, anything you do to really get your heart pumping. And this is a type of exercise that helps you to lose weight, and it really helps you to prevent many of the illnesses I talked about earlier. The second main type of exercise is strength training. And strength training is not only for the offensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals. We can all benefit from strength training. It helps us to keep our muscle tone, and surprisingly enough, strength training will help you to maintain your bone density as you get older, which is a problem for both men and women as they age. Strength training also will help you to maintain your weight, because a pound of muscle burns significantly more calories than a pound of fat. So by building muscle, you can actually help to control the weight. The third portion of any good exercise program is a stretching program. And this is very important because by gaining extra flexibility, you can really help prevent injuries such as pulled muscles, muscle strains. And once again, as you get older, flexibility is a great tool that will enable you to stay more active in your older years. Now, at this point, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about this exercise program. And this is something I found on the internet, but there are many, many different 15 to 20-minute exercise programs out there. So this is just one that I'm going to demonstrate to you today. Now, the first 10 minutes of this exercise program will involve aerobic exercise. And I'm not going to demonstrate that here today, but that basically means go out and walk for 10 minutes. You can jog for 10 minutes. If you have equipment in your home, you can use a stair stepper, you can use a treadmill, basically anything you can do to get your heart pumping. And as a rule of thumb, you want to exercise hard enough that your heart's pumping such that you feel a little bit out of breath, but not so hard that you can't carry on the conversation. Now, once we're done with that first 10 minutes of aerobic exercise, we're going to move on to strength training. And I'm going to show you a few exercises that we can start out with. Now, let me start by talking a little bit about dumbbells. I have two 10-pound dumbbells, and what I would suggest you do is go to your local sporting goods store and select the right weight for you. And the exercises I'm going to show you require about 10 to 15 repetitions, so when you get to that 15th repetition, it should cause a little bit of strain trying to get that 15th repetition done, and that's how you know you've got the right size dumbbells. So I'm going to start out with what I call the chest press, and because of the television audience, I'm not going to get down on the floor and demonstrate this because they won't be able to see me. But for this exercise, you lay flat on the floor, and if you can imagine, you're laying like this with your forearms pointed towards the sky, and you want to just raise the dumbbells like this, about 10 to 15 repetitions. And this is great for the chest, the triceps, and the shoulders. The second exercise is the curl. This is a pretty simple exercise. You stand with the dumbbells down to your side, and you bring your arm up to where your palm is facing inward, and then you alternate with the other arm, and you want to do this for about 10 to 15 repetitions for each arm. And the final exercise is the shoulder press, or shoulder raise. And on this one, once again, you stand with your arms down to your side. You want to bend your arms slightly, and then just raise your arms till they're parallel with the floor. You want to do this about 10 to 15 repetitions. And once again, this is very good for the shoulder area. Now, let's move on to the final portion of our program, which would be stretching. And stretching, as I said, is very important. I'm just going to show you two exercises, but there are a multitude of exercises that you can find that will help give you good stretching. The first one is called the side bend. You want to put your hands on your hips, and we'll start going off to the right. Raise your left hand and just bend over to the right. You want to hold this stretch for about 10 minutes. Then, 10 seconds. Then come back to center. Do the same thing going to the left, about 10 seconds. You can alternate this for about 2 or 3 times. And one key with stretching is You don't want to go like this, because doing this is really bouncing the muscle, and you're actually doing more harm than good. One, you can tend to tear a muscle, but also as you stretch that muscle in and out, you tend not to get that good stretching action. So you really want to stretch and hold. And the final stretch is to basically sit down on the floor with your legs straight out in front of you, and you want to put your arms out, and you want to go as far forward as you can towards your toes. And it's not really important that you touch your toes or grab your toes. Just go as far forward as you can and hold that stretch for about 30 seconds. And once again, it's very important not to bounce, because that's counterproductive. But just hold that for 30 seconds. You can relax, then do it again. And if you have time, I guess there's one final group of exercises, which really is really part of strength training, but it's really geared towards the abdominal section. And that is, I call them crunches, but it's a modified form of a sit-up. But get down on the floor, bend your knees, and just raise slightly up off the ground with your arms facing forward, and try to touch your knees, but you only want to raise up about 4 to 6 inches. You just want to go kind of like that, and you'll feel just a small crunching action, or a small, you'll feel some tension in your abdominal muscles, but do that for about 30 to 50 repetitions, and that will help you strengthen up your abdominals. Now, I've given you one example of an exercise program, but there are multitudes on the internet or in different fitness magazines, so it's not difficult to find a good program. So what I would recommend is you can start out with this program, but you definitely want to mix it up, because variety will really help you maintain that program. And finally, I guess I have one final question, and that is, by a show of hands, who plans to exercise next week? Thank you.
Steve, I have 2 comments, Darren. One of my motivations is that I pay my trainer whether I go or not. So that's a very good motivator. And the second one is walking is so good, because if you're on the treadmill, you can just quit. If you're out walking in the neighborhood, you have to get back. And you don't know how many times when I'm in Florida walking the beach, I thought, if anybody would come by and offer me a ride, I'd take it. But you have to get back. So walking is one of the best forms of the exercise. And thank you for that speech, Darren. Our third speaker, Dick Reed, is speaking from Project 4 in the Technical Presentation Advanced Manual on presenting a technical paper in 10 to 12 minutes. He's bringing us another aspect of the square-cube law of physics. We will review the fundamental concept and view examples of how size affects the characteristics of scale models. His speech is entitled, "It Ain't Necessarily So." Dick Reed, it ain't necessarily so.
Thank you, Carol. This speech is about a little different aspect of the square cube law than the one I gave earlier. First, I'd like to review the key points about how size affects physical properties, and then continue with how it applies to scale models of things. This is sometimes called the scaling law. We will see how this applies to models the size of celestial bodies. There's a nonlinear relationship between area and volume. What do I mean by nonlinear? Let me start by explaining a linear relationship. A linear relationship exists between time of travel and distance traveled. If you are driving 30 miles per hour for 1 hour, you will cover 30 miles. If you drive 30 miles per hour for 2 hours, you will drive 60 miles. This is a linear relationship. You double the time, you double the distance. Now, automobile stopping distances are nonlinear. If you are driving at 30 miles per hour and stop, the actual stopping distance should be in the neighborhood of 45 feet. But if you are driving 60 miles per hour and have to stop, the distance will be 4 times that, or 180 feet. So this is a nonlinear relationship. In fact, it's a square law relationship. Double the speed and 4 times the distance to stop. Now, Galileo Galilei wrote about this some 400 years ago when he noticed that the bones of large animals were proportionally larger than the bones of small animals. He noted that the bones of shrews and mice, their legs were typically very much smaller than the size of their bodies. Now, and he noted that the bones of cows were larger than the bones of a shrew, but that the strength of the bones, iron bars, and rope are proportional to the cross-sectional area of the device. In other words, if my arms were bigger and heavier bones and heavier muscles, I would be stronger. And thus the strength to weight ratio is different, because strength goes up by area, weight goes up by volume. I will apply this principle today to how celestial bodies are affected by this law. In the earlier speech, I described the premise of a science fiction movie where ants grew to 1,000 times their normal size, 1,000 times longer, 1,000 times wider, 1,000 times taller. Now, we know that ants are very strong for their size. They can pick up as much as 50 times their own weight when they're the size of ants. But let's multiply that length by 1,000, the width by 1,000, and the height by 1,000. So now we have an ant the size of a pickup truck. Now that ant is going to be 1,000,000 times stronger than it was as an ant, because its cross-sectional area of its legs went up by a factor of 1,000,000. But its body size went up by a factor of 1,000 cubed, or 1,000,000,000. So although the ant is 1,000,000 times stronger, he needs to be 1,000,000,000 times stronger just to pick himself up. So from that we concluded that a giant ant is really not a threat to mankind, even though it made for a good science fiction thriller. We also learned that human beings survive because of their different strength-to-weight ratios. My legs are quite a bit bigger proportional to my body than the legs of an ant, or of any insect for that matter, or or shrews, or mice, and so forth. And so we larger animals have adapted because we have larger legs and arms compared to our body. Now let's see what would happen if we ignore animals for a while and think about celestial bodies. And let's start by deciding that we're going to build a scale model of the Earth. Now, the core of the Earth is somewhere around 5,000 to 7,000 degrees centigrade, which is 9,000 to a little over 12,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's pretty hot. There's a lot of molten stuff down there. But yet the surface of the Earth is only about 60 degrees Fahrenheit on the average. Some places are hotter, some places are colder, of course, but on the average it works out to be about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Now a lot of heat escaped. Let me back up just a second here. One thing that we know when we compare the Earth and the moon is that the moon is about 1/4 of the diameter of the Earth. That means it has 1/16 of the surface area and 1/64 of the volume. But yet the interior of the moon is around 1,300 to 1,600 degrees centigrade, around 23 to 2900 degrees Fahrenheit. So the moon is significantly colder than the Earth. Now, how did that happen? A lot of heat escaped from the Earth and the moon because they were formed roughly the same time, some 4.5 billion years ago. So there was plenty of time for the heat to escape equally from both celestial bodies. But the moon is much colder. Why? Because it is much smaller. So the heat has a much greater surface area to escape from than the Earth did. The heat that was inside the Earth is captured by the fact that it has proportionally smaller surface area. Now, we can say, well, maybe the sun has something to do with why the Earth is hotter. But since the surface of the Earth is only about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, that doesn't explain it, because the heat, our great core heat, because if that were the case, if it was all coming from the sun, the core would be very cold. But the core is quite hot, and it is due to mostly potassium-40 decaying. It's radioactive materials decaying and converting their energy into heat. Now, let's see what would happen if we built a scale model of the Earth. We're going to keep all the proportions the same. We're going to cut it down from 1 to 100 million, so it'll be about the size of a grapefruit. But it will weigh about 20 pounds, so it'll weigh a bit more than a grapefruit, and that's because it is mostly iron in the inside, covered with a bunch of rocks, and a little bit of water and a little bit of oxygen hung in there just so that we can survive. So it is the potassium-40 that creates all the heat inside of our actual Earth. So let us put some potassium-40 inside our model and see what happens. Now, about 1 molecule in a million is potassium-40 in our actual Earth. So we'll keep those same proportions. And when we build this, we will find, just as the case with the moon, that it is not thousands of degrees inside our little model, but it is fractions of a degree. So even though we create a scale model with exactly the same proportions, we will find that it doesn't behave the same way. Now, this also explains the reason why we must bundle small children against the cold. Because if we don't bundle them against the cold, their smaller body sizes will give them problems with hypothermia. And so they are liable to suffer because of that. What have we covered today? Well, we had a very brief review of Galileo's square cube law. We learned that giant ants are not scary because they won't be able to move. They won't even be able to pick themselves up. We learned that large animals such as humans, cows, elephants, bears, and so forth adapt because their legs and their limbs are much larger compared to their body size than insects. We learned that small children should be dressed warmly in cold weather in order to keep them from having hypothermia. So we noted that scale models do not behave the same way as full-size models, even though the proportions are precisely the same. And therefore, observations made of those scale models must be taken with a little bit more analysis than actual direct measurements. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Dick, and I have a ribbon for you. Thank you, Tiffany. It's always good to have a new look at our club through different eyes, a fresh look with new eyes. And I did like your flock of seagulls. I hadn't heard that before. I like your expressions that you use. I think we had a good meeting. I enjoyed being here today, and hope more people will be here at the next time. Invite the audience to come and learn how to be able to get up in front of people and speak your thoughts instead of being tongue-tied. I will now turn control of the meeting back to our President Pro Tem, Gordon Kelly. Actually, our next president.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. I want to say thank you to everyone again for watching us on television and those that came out. There's one message that I think we always need to get out there. I'm nervous. When I show up here, I'm nervous typically. They say that studies show that people had rather die than to do public speaking. And I'm definitely one of those. If that survey would come around to me, that's just true. So we need to impress on especially the television audience, to come out, give us a try, see what you can do. We're all nervous. We're all trying to improve. I think everybody's nervous. We're all trying to improve our public speaking ability. It's that simple. I definitely don't look at myself as a public speaker, but I do have to talk in front of people. And this program definitely will help you. I can definitely vouch for that. Our next meeting is going to be June 14th. 16th. I'm sorry. The next meeting is the third Saturday, which is June 16th. But in July, there's a change there. The meeting will be on July 14th. Correct? So typically, our meetings are on the third Saturday of every month, except July has been changed. Okay, I want to make that real clear. District-wide officer training will be Saturday, July 21st. So we all need to consider that, those that need to go. And I'd like to ask if there's any comments from the guests. Any guests? I'm going to hand it up. You can get on www.toastmasters.org. That is the Toastmasters website, www.toastmasters.org. And there's all kinds of information there. Any other comments? At this time, TV Toastmasters Advanced Club 9523 is closed.